Welcome to The Heart of It, where we talk all things family life from a Christ-centered and Orthodox perspective. I'm Clara Bertan, and I'm really pleased to have on the broadcast with us Sam Wasfi. Welcome, Sam.
Thank you.
Okay, and so Sam, I know we're going to have a great conversation today. You are a licensed marriage and family therapist. You work primarily with couples, with individuals. You're also a dad. You co-lead our premarital ministry for Rediscover I Am, and also somebody who's just really thoughtful in the way that they approach topics. And because of that, I know our conversation will be deep today. I'm hoping, God willing.
Hoping.
Yes, right? We can hope. I know it's going to be good. And we're actually talking about attachment, which is a topic that may be familiar to some people, some of our listeners, and for some it might be a new concept. And I encourage you to stick with us, even if it is something that's new for you, because I do believe that it is a really important topic for us to delve into its significance and why it matters for us as parents. And we'll get to some of the considerations for that as well. But maybe before we get into attachment and what it's all about, if you would be willing to do one fun would you rather question with us?
All right.
Okay.
Yes, let's do it.
So would you rather hear the good news first or the bad news? Good news or bad news first?
Usually the bad news. Yes.
You want to get it out of the way.
I want to get it out of the way, and then I want to celebrate with the good one.
Okay, got it. And then the bad didn't exist.
The bad didn't exist.
It didn't happen.
Depending on how bad it was.
Yes, severity matters here.
Severity matters, yes.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive in then into our conversation today. And we are talking about attachment, and as we shared, perhaps it's a topic that's familiar to some of our listeners or it's new, but some things maybe to throw out for considerations even before we dive in. We're not talking about attachment parenting, which is kind of a style of parenting that's not necessarily what we're delving into today. That's kind of its own thing. We're talking about the concept of attachment on its own. Is that accurate? Like kind of as we're starting, and then one thing, because I know the terms are similar, so some people might be maybe putting the two together. And then the other thing that's worth noting when we bring up topics that are kind of maybe more of a psychological or perspective, that there's some people that wonder, where's God in the middle of all of this? And for us, we just want to acknowledge that God is at the center. He's at the root. He's hopefully encompassing this whole conversation. And as you're hearing some of the things that we are talking about today, we want to make sure that we are giving God all the honor and glory, that He is a God who is sovereign, who redeems, restores, makes all things whole. So as we're talking about some of these psychological concepts, like for a frame of reference, I think it's just really important that we put that out there as well. And so I want to then hand this over to you. Start us off with what attachment is.
Sure.
Why it's important, marriage, parenting, both from that biblical and psychological perspective.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me here.
I know I said so. I said so many words, and you've yet to say anything. No, we're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So when we're talking about attachment, we're talking about a deep emotional bond that begins with the caregiver and the infant. And, Dr. Daniel Siegel points out 4 aspects of attachment. He calls them the 4 S's of attachment. The first one is safety, that the child needs to know that they are safe in a very sort of fundamental way, that they're safe from predators, they're safe from starvation, but that they're safe. And even as the child develops and goes into 6 months, 9 months, the child needs to know that if while flaring their arm, they hit mom in the face, that mom's not going to hit them back, that there's a sense of physical safety. And the second thing is that the child is seen. In other words, not just seeing that the mom or the caregiver, father, whoever, grandparent is present, not so much that they're seen in sort of a superficial external way, but they're seeing that their inner experience, their inner life is known. the adult can look and say, my child right now is getting frustrated because they're attempting something and they're just sort of really frustrated trying to work through it. So there's a sense of safety. There's an experience of being seen, but there's another important S there, which is to be soothed.
Mm.
That as we develop, we don't know how to soothe ourselves unless it's in the context of a loving relationship. So it's the mom that picks up the child, or the dad that picks up the child and rocks the child, shushes them, and the calmness of the caregiver helps soothe the child, and the child begins to learn how to self-soothe through the behavioral exchange of the parent and the child, right? And when this happens with consistency, there's predictability. The child knows that I can go out here and explore this, I could explore that, I could try this. My 2-year-old is usually like jumping on the couch and wanting to do Superman off the couch. He wants to see how far can I push sort of the limits. And then when he gets hurt, he comes, oh, Dad, I got a boo-boo. And, he wants the hug and he wants to feel comforted. And so when this happens, it builds a sense of security. So we talk about this because what happens specifically in the first 3 years of life becomes a blueprint. It becomes a template of how we relate to other people. And it answers two fundamental questions. Am I lovable? And can I trust you to be there for me? So it's so interesting because the 3-year-old is asking, am I lovable? Can you be there for me? And when I'm fighting with my wife, I'm asking, am I lovable? Can I trust that you'll be there for me? And having done couples therapy for years now, that is often the underlying question that we're asking, whether we're fighting about the dishes, whether we're fighting about, I had a work party and you didn't want to come to it. The question is, can I trust that you'll be there for me? And do you love me enough to sort of stick it out with me?
Mm-hmm. I love the clarity of those S's, and, walk me through them again. It's safety.
So safety, seen, soothed, secure.
And secure, right?
Yes.
And those things, at least as I'm hearing you describe them, there's a sense of this being kind of this natural almost order of things that, attachment in some ways isn't something that we really think about until maybe there's some violation or some breach in some way. And I love what you said about, am I lovable? Because I think if any 2-year-old were to ask their parent that, of course, like the resounding answer would be yes.
Yes.
But some of the behaviors then that our children are exhibiting to ask that question might not seem so clear that that's the question that they're actually asking. So walk us through then, what does that secure attachment look like in parenting in a child? And what does it look like long-term in how that builds Christ-centered relationships for the future, healthy relationships for the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when children are securely attached, they can ask for help from a parent. It's interesting because when I do first session with new patients, new clients, I often will ask them, growing up, when you felt sad, lonely, shame, who did you go to for emotional comfort? And you get varying answers, right? Some people will say, I went to my mom. Some people will say, I went to my grandma. Some people will say, I had an amazing neighbor or teacher that I went to. And there's a number of people who will say nobody. And so we'll talk about that, like what happens when there is nobody that you could go to as a child. But securely attached children know that the home and the parents are a safe haven. So I could go out, I could explore, but there's an internal sense of security that if things get bad, I have a place of comfort. If I get lost, there's a way for me to get back to safety. So they're independent enough but yet they're dependent enough. You'll see sometimes as children grow up and get into adulthood that some people will say, no, I don't ask for help from anybody. Yeah, those are people who have some level of attachment injury, right? Like in times of need, people were not there for me, or my parent was too stressed, too overwhelmed, too anxious that I felt like a burden asking for help or support. So I've learned to manage things on my own, and so I don't ask for help from anyone. So in securely attached children, the child feels that they can go to the parent, they can ask for help, they can make mistakes, and it's not going to rupture the relationship, right? They could apologize and sort of have repair be made. So there's a sense of stability there. Yeah.
Well, maybe then that's a good way for us to segue into what builds then that sense of secure attachment. And as you're sharing that, what do those ruptures look like? Talk us through how that's, securely attached, healthy in some ways, and then where we as parents can ultimately get things wrong in our attempt to have, again, what we're saying is this natural response as parents, but sometimes we can falter along the way.
Yeah. In terms of like little ruptions, right? Because sometimes you could have like a huge rupture, and you could have little T trauma or big T traumas, right? But little T sort of traumas is a consistent criticism, right? Your child say like, why does your hair look like that? You're gonna wear those shoes today? Why? I remember someone telling me, they were growing up in Egypt, and they were taking a national exam sometime during like middle and high school, and the person said, I studied, I snuck coffee into my room so I could just drink lots of coffee behind my parents' back and study and do really, really, really well in this exam. And the person scored like third in the nation or something like that. And the first thing the dad said was, and this person was so driven just to hear, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the effort and the work that you put into this. And of course, the first thing that the parent said was, nobody really remembers third. Why? Like, why did you get third? Like, where did you go wrong in this sort of thing? And they recall how crushed they were. So this is a person in their 40s, and now just remembering this, how crushing this was, that like irrespective of what I do, I want this validation from you, and I can't seem to get it. There's a wonderful psychoanalyst, Alice Miller. She has this beautiful quote that I love, and she says, when love is dependent on behavior, right, the child will do whatever it takes to gain that love from the parent. And so she also says this is where perfectionism starts, that if I get it just right enough, that if I'm perfect just enough, I will attain your love. I will get your love. And so then they'll have this really, really rigid expectation of themselves. And then she continues by saying, and underneath that perfectionism lies the weight of depression. Once that rigidity of expectation cannot be met, then a sense of meaninglessness and hopelessness comes in. So sometimes, there could be sort of a noble intention of saying, like, I want my child to really be the best because they're capable in it. But sometimes we can sort of bring that in a way that sends the message that whoever you are now is just not enough. I need you to be something different, someone different, other than just who you are in this moment. And all of us are fighting to say, can I just like in this who I am now, can I be lovable and accepted enough?
Mm-hmm.
And these conversations never go away. They follow us throughout our whole lifespan. If this is a childhood wound, you'll see it in a couples therapy session. That same dialogue is still taking place. Right? In the 30s, 40s, 50s is we're constantly struggling to say to the other person, can you find me lovable enough, acceptable enough?
And what I'm hearing you say, there's the sense of what we're looking for from our parents, our primary attachments, right? Our caregivers,
Yes.
to be loved the way that God loves us so deeply, to be seen, to be known, to be accepted just for, who we are created to be. Not that as parents, we're not helping our children develop and grow and recognize the areas of their life where there needs to be movement or improvement. It's not that, but as who I am, do you love me? Do you see me? And as I'm hearing you share that, Sam, it kind of brings to mind for me that parent who maybe has heard that, if you are too, it's not praise, but, if you're too intentional maybe about, rewarding every, achievement, or if you're coddling in some way, if you're too invested in that maybe is actually a crutch for the child in some way. So help sort that out for us, because I think that's maybe where some parents wrestle a little bit, like what's safe, secure, healthy attachment where you're seen, and what could be maybe overbearing and smothering a child where they don't find their sense of self or independence.
Yeah. Well, I like that you reference God in this, because I think God portrays such a wonderful model. Like in the Psalms, God is referred to as a refuge, a place of refuge, a place of safety. He is a shelter for those who are in the storm, right? You get this sense that he is this encompassing love that you can go to. The other thing about God is that you never have to question. Like, you never have to question, like, if this person driving on the freeway, really upsets me and I started cursing at them, I wonder if God would be okay with this or not. Right. If I go, and decide to rob a bank, and I likely will get caught since I've never done that before. And then I get on my knees and I say, Lord, please forgive me for having done this. What's to come from that? It's very clear. Well, God will forgive me, but it's likely that I'll still go to federal prison and I'll do some jail time, and God will say, I love you, my son. I'm here with you while you do your however many years of federal prison time. So I think God models this super parent that there's no question that he is a safe haven. He is the shelter of those in the storm. He is the ocean of forgiveness and love. And he's one who holds us accountable and doesn't take away natural consequences. Doesn't say like, oh, now that you ask for forgiveness, you don't have to serve, prison time for robbing a bank. You just go on your way and go sit in a nice sort of park somewhere. And that's loving, firm. That's loving and sturdy, right? And that's a wonderful model for us, right? There's a natural consequence for a child misbehaving. You're like, I love you. I'm here with you. Yes, you still can't have that. You still can't go today. Remember that consequence? And I know this hurt. This doesn't feel good because you really wanted this. I get it. I feel for you. I know this has to be miserable for you.
And what you're talking about, being able to do that as a parent, means I need to be secure. I need to be firm in who I see myself to be, in God's love for me, in my marriage. Like, that is such a high level of attunement to self, right? To be able to look at our children and say, I love you, and yet I'm still holding this boundary, and that this is still not okay. Like, it's very hard for a parent to hold that balance, that tension, which I think is so vital, so important.
Yes.
And to still parent effectively
Yes.
in that.
Not only is it hard, but if my relationship, for example, with my mom was that of an anxious attachment, right?
Which describe that a little bit. Like, what would that mean?
Yeah. So maybe I was criticized a lot, right? And I'm constantly thinking, am I good enough? Will you be there for me? Can I connect with you emotionally? I'm not really sure. Right. So if I come from this anxious attachment and my child says, are you serious? You're not going to let me go to this place? And my anxiety comes up as if I hold my ground, my child's not going to like me. They're not going to love me. And it's so painful because then it reinforces that maybe mom was right. Maybe I wasn't so lovable after all. And I need to get my kid to love me. Right. This is how sort of like we are wounded from previous relationships and then we could bleed on our children in that way. Right. Like, so yeah, self-awareness is huge because I can feel my anxiety. Like I need you to love me. You understand, child? Like you don't mess this up. Like I need you to love me, desperately need you to love me. So,
which then becomes more about me.
Oh,
right. Like not the well-being of my child and what actually matters for their long-term health and emotional growth and their relationship with God. Like it's all about soothing myself.
In that moment, it has nothing to do with the child. It's all about me bearing with the pain of rejection. And if I have this, I come into my marriage and into a parent anxiously attached, those moments are going to be very, very difficult, especially if my daughter turns around and goes, Dad, I so dislike you, or even worse, I hate you, Dad. Right? How do I sit with that if I have this sort of insecurity about my own self-worth, about my own ability to be a lovable person? So I have to do some work on that. Maybe later we could talk about what that work looks like, but I have to do some work on that.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the fear will drive my interaction with my child. Okay, don't get upset. Okay, fine, you could go. Or just don't do that again. Okay, fine. Like, right, like it's again, like going back to Alice Miller's quote, like I'll be the clown. I'll do whatever you want me to do for you to love me. And if I get you to love me, then maybe my mom was wrong after all. Like I've corrected it in my relationship with you, my child. Like you proved to me that I can be loved, and maybe my mom was wrong.
And what you're bringing up kind of takes me to a few places. One would be, none of us had perfect childhoods, right? Like, there's it's always a mixed bag.
It's always a mixed bag
in some ways. And then even as we parent, we're never in that place of, always standing firm in God's truth and who we know ourselves to be, and in parenting in that overflow of that. So maybe talk us through then, how can we tell, if it was just a regular childhood in the sense of like a parent who had good days and bad days versus maybe some patterns and things that are more set that should maybe throw up some caution flags for us to pay a little bit more attention as to how those things maybe have affected us and are showing up in our marriages and in our parenting.
Yes. I mean, the first fair place to start is most people do the best that they can in the circumstances they're in with the information that they have. And we have now a plethora of information that we could utilize and then use that to sort of look back and say, oh, well, you could have done this differently, right? And certainly it could be unfair to parents to bring to bring something they didn't have access to in order to sort of analyze them or sort of assess how well they did their parent. So I like to just start off by saying like, okay, mom, dad, you did the best you could with what you had. Totally get it. And it doesn't mean that I was not impacted by this. So the two things can go hand in hand. You did the best that you could. Thank you. I appreciate it. There are many lovely ways that you've loved me and took care of me and provided for me, and I'm eternally grateful for that. And I also need to have um, an honest reflection encounter with myself, right? Like if my child is not listening to me and I have a disproportionate reaction of anger, it might not just be about this moment. It might be that this child's bringing up something for me that's more long lasting, about, right? And so looking back, um, was I able to turn to my parent for comfort? Were my parents consistent in showing love and having boundaries? Did they model for me ways of repairing relationship when it didn't go well? I mean, were they able to say, "Hey, yesterday I yelled and I apologize for doing that." um or were there a consistent pattern of sending a message of you're not good enough, whatever happened, if I yelled because it was your fault, like if you didn't do that I wouldn't have yelled at you, sort of um like having like really really big emotions and justifying it because of circumstances. So those kind of things, like a pervasive occurrence of those behaviors, are going to have an impact on your development. And now it's my responsibility to sort of sort through that and work through that and grow from that.
And what I'm hearing you say is to pay attention
Yes.
to what we've internalized,
Yeah.
what we've allowed to become part of our voice,
Yeah.
and how that's impacting our marriages, our parenting, and to notice if there's areas where maybe our reactions are disproportionate, or maybe you're not necessarily able to connect, like, why am I responding in this way? That could be a really good place of exploration
Yeah.
for us in healthy, trusted relationships before God, certainly, to be able to ask those questions like, where is this coming from? Because otherwise, I'm hearing you say it's just going to keep showing up
Yes.
in our relationships.
Yes, it's going to keep showing up, and it also has dual purposes. I think like becoming a father, what has really drawn my attention to like how my relationship with my child has um this sort of parallel process between my relationship with God is like when my kid's standing on the stairs, there's just like two steps up, and I say, "Jump, I'll catch you." And they don't. And I say, "Just jump, I'll catch you. I've never not caught you before. Like, jump, I'll catch you." And they're unwilling. That sense of like disappointment of, why don't you trust me? In those moments, I so often connect it back to God and I go, yeah, I get it. Like, I get it. Like, there are times where I'm like, yeah, I could depend on God for this, but I'm not going to. I want to make sure that I have this lined up and I have this lined up. And I know it's distrusting God, and I'm willing to still go with it because it feels more comfortable to know that I am in control. So in one way, like those feelings, when they come up, they could point to my relationship with God, and that happens to me a lot. And the other way I can say, why is it that when my child's not listening to me, why does it bring up so much sort of strong emotions? What does that have to do with my own upbringing? Did I often feel unheard in my family of origin? And so again, when I respond to my son, my daughter, in this sort of exaggerated way, is it about this moment, or is it about all the years that I felt unheard by my family? And so, something to look at, consider, and worth thinking about.
And I think part of doing that work is making sure that we're not resigning ourselves to be destined to repeat those same
Yes.
patterns in our family life, and to just kind of like let that take over
Yes.
in some ways.
So there's a beautiful, there's a beautiful calling, which is to transform generational trauma, generational suffering. Like we get to pause, look, reflect, and say, yeah, I'm willing to work on myself. What do I need to do? I'll go to therapy. I'll get coaching. I'll read books. I'm willing to do that work because it's worth it. Because then I pass on a different generation to
Mm-hmm.
my child. I mean, there's certain things that
Mm-hmm.
my kid has never experienced that I experienced.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's a good thing. That's a very encouraging thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Part of the maturation process for us as adults,
Yeah.
as parents, and I think the refinement, the sanctification
Yes.
process, like I think it's almost built in. Like I know there's things that my children will have to process and work through in their adult relationships and in some of the areas where, by the grace of God, I'm trying to do it as best I can. But, in some ways that they will have to wrestle with something. And that's not always, to the detriment of their future or for their relationships. Again, as long as we're being intentional about that. And I am curious, Sam, as we look through then some of those patterns in our early childhood. Walk us through, what does that then mean for marriage, who we choose for partnership? Like, what's the connection there? Because certainly before, for most of us, before we become parents, we're certainly entering into adult relationships first. So there's almost a progression to that. So help us make those connections.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because sometimes you'll hear, you'll see two people who are dating and they've been dating for 3-4 months, and they'll say, Susie, I feel like I've known her all my life. She does sometimes rub me the wrong way, but I feel like we've known each other all our lives. And in some cases, it's true, because if this person, we are attracted to what's familiar. And so sometimes on a conscious level, we pick a partner, but on a subconscious level, we pick someone who is familiar to us. We've made this connection between a love figure and sort of their dynamic with us. So if my mother is a love figure for me, right? Everybody says, yes, I love my mother and so on. And yet I felt anxious around her. I felt like, I don't know if you really love me. I don't know if I could count on you. I don't know if you could be there for me. Right. And I meet a partner that makes me feel this way. I go, I don't like that I sometimes feel this way with you, but it feels so familiar. So I could be sort of drawn to someone. And again, on a subconscious level, it's like, well, then if I can get you to then really, really love me, then I'll sort of overcome that burden in me, right? And so sometimes, like, we're driven by these subconscious drives to pick partners who are similar. And people say this all the time, like, oh gosh, I've married someone like my dad, or the other thing that happens is, like, someone will say, my dad was very hypercritical, so I intentionally picked a man who's like cool as a cucumber.
Mm-hmm. Almost maybe passive to the other extreme.
Yeah. So then what ends up happening is, after several years, the wife, for example, I'm thinking of a specific couple now, the wife will say, you don't want to go back to school and get this next degree, or you don't want to do this training, or you don't. And he's like, no, I'm fine. Like, I'm okay with my life. I make good money. I'm happy with my life. I don't. And as she begins to be sort of provoked by his sort of lack of drive, what she perceives as lack of drive, she begins to take on, like, her dad's characteristics. So he experiences her as as the critical one who's sort of becoming domineering and so on. So we have a tendency to sort of repeat these same sort of attachment styles that we experience in a family of origin and the partner that we pick and how we relate to them. Um, and unless we just pause and say, what's going on here? What am I doing? What am I feeling? What am I needing? And to really pause and reflect, then we can just, keep this wheel spinning for generation.
And if we're finding ourselves already in those patterns and in those dynamics, I'm hearing you say slowing down enough. And we'll use the word of paying attention as to what's happening. And it doesn't have to be like this critical psychoanalysis. Like it's just paying attention, really. And then having enough courage, I think, to do the work, to enter into spaces that might be uncomfortable for us, to ask those questions, and then have the willingness to do something in response to that. So then let's transition then into that parenting then piece of, here's maybe mom and dad with some issues that they're bringing in from their parent, from their family of origin, and how that's then showing up in their marital relationship. And so what does that look like? I'm thinking of, the 2 or 3 year old who's at home is seeing kind of some of these, like, imperceptibly, these little dysfunctions, and how does that relate then to parenting? Like, I'm curious then where somebody can start to do that work. If we're noticing these are patterns, we need to start paying attention to them. There's this precious life that very much depends on us paying attention to those things. Like, where do we begin with that work?
Yeah, I came across this study that was done in 2023 by Georgetown University, and it was looking at individuals who grew up in Catholic homes, raised by Catholic families. How many of these children, once they became adults, continued on with their faith, and why? And so the research suggested, I don't even know the sample size, but I remember sort of the looking through the abstract and sort of the conclusion of it is that of those raised in Catholic families, only 15% of the children lived as Catholic adults and practiced Catholic. But all of those 15% said that the reason why they remained their Catholic faith was that the home was a source of warmth. That's what it came down to, this one thing, warmth. That they integrated the spiritual life in the home in a way that felt warm. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't critical. It was that prayer was part of home life. Reading the scripture was part of home life. Mom and dad behaviorally sort of illustrated love and forgiveness and kindness. And that warmth was what kept them in the faith. And so one way to look is like to look at myself at home. Am I a warm, loving presence for my spouse and my kids? It doesn't matter what I say. I mean, it doesn't matter if I have 2 PhDs in theology and patristics and so on, and I teach it all the time, because what sticks is the relational model, like how I experience you. So if I have all the knowledge and my child experiences me as cold, as distant, as critical, as harsh, none of the other things will be helpful. So that's usually a good place to start, is being able to sort of look at how others experience us at home.
The posture of the heart.
The posture of the heart.
I'm hearing. And then perhaps even as important is, and at least maybe that's just kind of the way I tend to think of it sometimes, is that it's really easy to pinpoint like a problem with a child. For example, like you can tell the child that's disobedient or disrespectful, and then kind of all our energy can kind of get, directed towards that, versus, what does it look like that we're modeling in our marriages, in our homes, that warmth, that
Yes.
you're speaking to. So perhaps if we could say there's almost an order to this, that, perhaps before we examine what the problems that are maybe taking place with our parenting, that maybe we're taking a look into our hearts, into our marriages, that there's something to do there first, like some of that work there first before we direct some of our energy towards parenting. Is that a fair thing to say?
This is where science and the patristic literature sort of meet,
Mm.
because everybody agrees that there should be an order, and it goes God, marriage, children.
Mm.
So for me, if I wake up in the morning and if I turn to Christ, if I get on my knees and I turn to Christ and I receive, because he won't send anyone away empty handed, and I receive, what happens is when I turn to my kid and my kid's being whatever, rude or short or whatever, there's a level of grace that I can sort of encounter that moment with. Versus that if I come to that same encounter feeling shame and feeling irritable and feeling whatever I'm feeling, that's going to determine definitely how I respond to this moment. So yes, so God first, and then making sure that my wife and I are in good place. Sometimes people sort of out of helplessness, they'll say, "All right, the marriage is too much. It's not gonna work. I'm just gonna focus on the kids," and it doesn't work like that, because in your interaction with your spouse, right, there's all these little things that the children are noticing, that you're short with mom or you're disrespectful towards dad, and they're just picking up all these things. And I hear it like when I interview couples, and I tell them, like, how did you first receive love or encounter love among your parents? And you'll see people will say something like, when we were driving to church, like, my dad would hold my mom's hand, or my mom would always put her hand on his shoulder when they're drinking tea. Or is it those little things that the children really soak in and pick up and retain for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing the importance of that. I'm hearing the order, and then
Yes.
I'm curious then if there is, maybe for a variety of reasons, maybe a brokenness in that attachment, or there's some work that needs to be done there. What does that look like for children who are then seeking that attachment elsewhere, who are maybe looking towards peers in how they are then orienting themselves to the world, or where they're getting that safety, that feeling of being seen, soothed, all the things that you mentioned
Yeah.
earlier, and kind of what are the risks
Yes.
that come alongside with
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we are deeply yearning for connection, for attachment. And if we can't get it from our parents, we'll get it from wherever we can. And sometimes people are fortunate that they'll get it from grandparents, they'll get it from good teachers, they'll get it. And then other times, certainly during adolescence, that youth will turn to whatever peer group will accept them, because they feel that they belong. They feel like someone sees them. They know their inner life, right? They could turn to their parents, say, "You don't even know, what kind of music I like, or you don't know what my favorite food. You just don't know me." But this person does. This person has taken the time to actually listen and know my heart, know my desires, know my dreams. Do you know my dreams? Do you know? So yes, they'll seek it out. And the risk of that is, I mean, in some ways, I don't want to polarize it. In some ways, um, God's grace can be found in that. If parents are not very attuned, God can send someone who's a good friend or a good neighbor, a good teacher to help guide this child. Um, and it's not a perfect substitute, but it's a substitute. But in other ways, then it's left to someone else to sort of instill core values, core messages. There's this thing about, like, whoever gets um, to answer your kid's question first has a pretty lasting impression, right? Like when a 14-year-old girl turns to a 14-year-old girl and asks her something about her body, or how she relates to food, or how she relates to sexuality, and so on. Whatever that first answer is, it typically is a pretty lasting answer, right? Um, and so that's the risk that you take if you don't have, if we're not cultivating a deeper connection with our kids, um, among other things. um, Oftentimes, like, people who struggle with any kind of addiction have an attachment injury. They have there's something that they're yearning for, could not get it in relationships, and something else had to be a substitute, whether it's video games, whether it's substances, whether it's bad relationship. Something had to be a substitute. There's a hole in the heart that we will continuously pursue until it's filled, or until there's something that mimics it being filled.
Maybe I'm thinking of the parent as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, Sam, who maybe is looking back on maybe one too many ruptures, too many moments of feeling like we haven't been as attuned, as responsive, which, it takes time. It takes effort. It takes intentionality to do those things. So, what encouragement do you have for that parent, and especially as it relates to restoring our relationship with God, getting back to that order that you were mentioning earlier?
Yes. Your kids want connection. Your spouse wants connection. And we need a way to get to it. And so being able just to pause and say, what's happening within me? What do I need? And being able to talk first with your spouse, like, what is it that we want to see in our home? What do we want our home to be? Like, how do we want to feel in our home? Does it feel like, do we want it to feel playful and have kindness being exchanged and loving? Is that what we want? Not what is, but just even dreaming just for a minute. Like, is that what we're going for? Is that what we want? And then going into what do we need to do in order to get there? And what kind of resources do we need to bring in? Maybe we've tried to do this on our own and we need some support. We need some help. What would help look like? And then from there, even being able to, tell our children, like, hey, I noticed that, in the evening things get really tense, and I want us to try to do things differently. Like, maybe we're going to bring a game to the dinner table, and we're going to play table topics and ask each other some really fun questions. What do you think about that? And then getting people on board, but it all starts with, like, recognizing that just because it doesn't have to continue being that way. That we can make changes. And this from family systems, right? Like, if you make one small change in the system, the whole system changes. So that's empowering. That if I wake up and say, I'm going to have a different attitude, or I am going to kneel and pray before I engage with my wife or my kids, there's a ripple effect to that. That maybe mom experiences me a little bit more gentle, and that makes her a little bit more happier, and then she engages with the kids different. So that could be very empowering, just to be able to reflect and do something yourself.
Yeah, I love that, and to know just how deeply loved we are, and that everything that we do in each of our relationships is born from that place of our security in God's heart, who we are to a good God who redeems, who restores. And as I'm hearing you say, to pay attention, to have courage, to do the work, to recognize the small steps, the little things that we can be intentional about, that can then create that ripple effect, and to then feel encouraged to keep doing more, because we do see that there's something very profound about the impact that it's making. And so thank you so much, Sam. It's been such a wonderful conversation, very enriching, and we hope and pray that you've been encouraged, and that you've benefited from this time. And I know I have, so we continue to pray for you and for your family, and we hope that you are continuing to pray for ours as well. Thank you.